you've been quite vocal about the fact that veganism is, in fact, a white and black issue and that there is no gray area. What do you say to someone who blatantly explains that they just don't share the same moral compass you do, even after you have thrown the kitchen sink at them?
I just point out what they said in the beginning of the interaction, which was that they were against animal abuse, because usually everybody says that. So okay. That's
so
one,
you
one
literally
of the reasons
revert to the very beginning of the conversation?
Back to their own words.
Right.
So if there's a gray area, why did they answer so black and white to that question? Are you against animal abuse? How do you feel about it? They always say it's wrong. So
okay. Yeah. So even after you've debunked myths, even after you've spoken about slaughterhouse footage, after you've asked them how they feel watching it, and they say, I just don't see it, man. I'm sorry, you're wasting your time. You just go back to telling him, so you lied to me? So you told me you were full of shit. So you're full of shit, right? You lied to my face right off the bat, and now you're retracting your words. Is that something you've said before? I mean, that's something I'd consider saying. I'll be honest.
Yeah,
I don't give a shit. I use people walking away and me probably never seeing them again as a tool, not a crutch. I see it as a tool, and just being myself. I mean, I don't give a shit. I'm probably never gonna see you. I don't give a shit of what you think about me. That's something I agree with you too. Like, I don't care if you're gonna like me or not. I'm probably never gonna see you again unless you ran across this video on YouTube a month later. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so you're full of shit, right? So you lied to me? I'll tell him to the face. I don't care. I'm like you. I'm aggressive. That's how it is. You know what I've said before?
It's the least that we could do on behalf of the animals. I mean, these people are just going to go on and continue eating torture products and laughing at vegans and mocking the suffering of animals. It's the least that we could say to them is that they're full of shit.
Yeah, basically. I don't know about you, but this is one tool that I implement in my outreach. I say, isn't that look at the face on that bobby calf? I will say, isn't that terror in their face? And they will undoubtedly agree with me. And so I said, so are you gonna stop funding terrorism? And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I'm talking to them as if they were ISIS or something. You are literally funding terrorism. If you agree with me that the face of that bobby calf screams terror, you are funding terrorism. I said it before.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
You are funding terrorism. If you agree that calf face screams terror, you are funding terrorism with your hard-earned money, mind you.
Yeah, I mean,
said that.
Whilst making excuses about it. So yeah, I agree that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. It's important that we say it like that. That's what it is. So let's just say it as it is.
Right. So I believe, honestly, and this is just me being completely transparent with you, I believe that there is no activism too little. We all have conversations with fellow coworkers, on the train, in an elevator, what have you. Why is it that the mere utterance of the words "I'm vegan" seem to immediately appall and trigger some sort of defense mechanism in a non-vegan?
I broke this down in my workshop. You know, this is the most intimate connection that people have with the outside world, what they put into their bodies. And when you have a mirror being put up to you, that in fact what you're putting in your bodies is not just things, they're living, breathing beings. It's not what you're putting into your bodies, it's who. And that's what vegans represent, is a reminder. And it's such a trigger for people for that reason, being reminded of the fact that you have blood on your hands. And you don't just hold a different view. Your views lead to knives sliding into throats. and that's just one aspect of the injustice. So that reminder is why. So number one, it's the most intimate connection that people have with the outside world. And number two, this is the largest and longest standing injustice that everybody's involved in. And then they're so heavily involved in it 3 times a day, 4 times a day, maybe more. So a huge, and that's why I say we can't expect this to be pleasant. This is an ugly process for people to face. So just get used to that, accept that, and whilst you point this out to people in a direct way, even vegans will work against you and say that you're doing it wrong. And it's because there's so much bigotry around animals. And I've seen a lot of this in the vegan movement, actually, is the bigotry towards animals. Like we don't even think that they deserve to have a direct message for them, to speak boldly, directly, call people out, call them hypocrites, animal abusers, hold them accountable to a T. We think so many vegans think that is a problematic approach. So we have everybody working against us to do the very thing we need to do, or most people, it seems. But when you do it, it's the most effective way of breaking through all of those layers of conditioning.
Conditioning is a powerful word. Okay. Layers of conditioning. That strikes curiosity in me. What exactly do you mean by that? Layers.
Well, think about how many years have gone by of people normalizing this bigotry and everybody around them normalizing it.
Okay. I get you. So it's a time scheme for you. Is that what you meant to say?
It's just that it's so deeply buried in people's way of thinking that the only way to yank it out, I found, to deeply dig into their souls and pull out the truth that they know they know it's true, but then they keep arguing against it. They keep trying to battle it in the mind. And that's why what I do hits you in the gut. And what I'm recommending others do is hit people in the guts, hit them in the chest, not in the head. All these logical strategies and tricks and schmoozing people, that's all like trying to trick people from here in the head, right? And whilst logic is important, some logic is important. Of course, we have the truth on our side, so it's a given that we have logic on our side. It's more important to really get under people's skin and hit them in the gut, because that's where it's deeply buried. It's like really deeply buried in our systems over the years of conditioning that we've had around this subject.
All right. It's a good thing you're mentioning that, because that's exactly the direction in which the next question is going. During that recent workshop, which I used to prepare for this interview, you were quoted as saying, quote unquote, guilt is effective. It's the only thing that gets people to go vegan. Those are your exact words. What made you say that? And aside from hypocrisy and animal abuser, can you provide other examples of how to make people feel the guilt during an outreach?
You used a good word, terrorist. Bigot is another one. Human supremacist. A violent bully. These kinds of terms, but it's mainly just to put it in a simple form, like to answer your question. It's just about holding people accountable to what they're contributing to. And when you do that effectively, people should feel guilty at the end of it. Otherwise, you're not doing it effectively. Because we're talking about injustice here.
And what are some of the signs that you are being successful during an outreach? Do they start asking you like buying questions, like, okay, like, let me get your card, or I don't know, asking about what I can substitute my meat with? Like, how do you know you're being successful and you're going about things the right way?
Look, sometimes people might say those things that you just suggested, but I'll answer the question generically. So most of the time when people are facing this, they're reluctant. They're very reluctant. They'll seem too busy for taking this on board. They'll concede. They usually concede, which means they don't put up any more arguments. They don't usually fight with you anymore. They know what you're saying is true. And they just walk off feeling bothered, but trying to maintain their cool about it. So they're usually flattened out when they walk off, but they're trying to maintain their cool about it and just get on with their day. And then what usually happens is they think about it, and then they talk about it with others, and then that starts to grow inside them, the knowingness of that interaction. So the truth is, we'll never know if someone goes vegan or not. We will just never find out, really. It's better to just accept that. And you may find out from some, but most of the time you will not hear back from these people. And it may happen months after you spoke to them. So yeah, that's usually how people face it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we don't have a measuring stick of how to gauge our effectiveness during, our respective outreach forms or activist, methodology, if what have you. Okay, that's fair enough. Judging by your exposure of the isms, right? Namely vegetarianism, pescatarianism, flexitarianism, it's safe to say you're not a fan and believe they tarnish the true message of veganism. You mentioned in the workshop, but if we could touch base on that again, why do you think that diminishes the returns and the impact veganism can eventually have and overtake all these others?
Could you ask me that again, please?
Yeah, sure.
Vegetarianism?
So, yeah. You in the workshop again, I use this as a focal point of my studying you basically, and you mentioned that you have a bitter case against the isms, the vegetarianism, the flexitarianism, the pescatarianism, as people who eat fish call themselves. It's safe to say you're just simply not a fan and believe they tarnish the true message. How is it that they dilute the impact people like you and me can have?
Well, it creates a bootleg version of veganism. And there's no alternative to this. You're either an animal abuser or you're not. So if we coddle these other alternative bootleg versions of defending animals, which don't actually defend animals at all, it gives people the impression that you can do these if you find being vegan too restrictive or too much for you to take on, or whatever excuse people attach themselves to and whatever excuse we end up coddling in this movement, not me, but others, then we give them this impression that they are animal defenders to some degree. And the truth is that even if you reduce how many animals you enslave, torture, and murder, that you're not saving any animals. You're just sparing some from the torture and the enslavement and murder. Even vegans aren't saving animals. We're just sparing animals from an otherwise evil injustice we shouldn't have been subjecting them to anyway, to begin with. So we just stopped doing something we shouldn't have been doing our whole lives. Right. There's no, you're not an animal defender now as a result of that. You're just no longer an animal abuser. So that's a relief for the victims. You shouldn't get a pat on the back for that. You're now making amends. You're in reform. So I'm relieved for the victims when someone tells me that they've gone vegan. There's no clapping, pat on the back. I'm just relieved. I'm glad. I'm very glad that you no longer subject these victims to a literal hell. When you become an activist, a vegan activist, then you're attempting to save animals. That's the only situation that you could ever be labeled as someone who defends animals, when you're an activist. So the truth is that not even vegans, as a default position, save animals or defend animals. You're just no longer an animal abuser. So the fact that we would label a vegetarian, a pescatarian, a flexitarian, reducitarian, or whatever as an animal defender, whether we say that out loud in our words and we label them that vocally, or we say that in our actions towards them in the way that we coddle them. And I say we, but I need to stop saying we because I'm not a part of this anymore. We're talking about I never was actually, but I'm talking about like other vegans who do this shit. And the more that they're coddled into thinking that they are animal defenders, it becomes a cancer for getting to the point where we need to get to, which is the fact that only animal rights activism is worthy of defending animals and can only ever be seen as defending animals and nothing other than that. And being vegan is just a moral baseline, as you've heard, you've probably heard that term before. It's just a baseline, which means you're just no longer participating in the injustice.
I think that in that same bunch of sentences, you mentioned the fact that they believe they are doing enough already. And I vividly recall you saying something along the lines of, we're not the ones that you should be talking about, except you are. You are the perfect people that we should be talking about. You remember that?
Yeah.
So that kind of clung to me because, they are the people that, again, think they're doing enough already and shouldn't be bothered with any more, which shouldn't be bothered to go the extra distance. Whereas, for example, a vegetarian, that to me is the ultimate double whammy because the byproducts, in my opinion, this is just me speaking out loud, the byproduct is the double whammy in the sense that once a cow stops giving and producing milk or good enough to do so, then they become meat. Once an egg-laying chicken is no longer actively pursuing that the purpose, then she also becomes meat. And so that's perhaps something that vegetarians don't see eye to eye with. And by leaving meat off their plates, they think that they are doing enough. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Again, let's go back to that chat you had. We are addressing the largest and longest standing injustice on the planet and the most pressing issue of our time. Are words you mentioned during the aforementioned workshop. Why do most people, Paul, fail to see it this way? And how can we remove that veil that's been imparted seemingly from the moment they use reason?
Are you talking about vegans or non-vegans?
I'm talking about non-vegans, of course, yeah.
Okay. How do we get them to see it that way?
Yeah, how do we remove that veil that's been literally blinding their vision of reality of the world you and I we know we live in? How do we remove that veil?
Well, essentially in the approach that I'm recommending, which is to hold people accountable, to speak about this directly. Don't mince your words. Don't beat around the bush. Don't bullshit people. Tell people the truth about what this is all about. There's more bloodshed. I don't like using statistics, but there's only one, there's some facts I like to use to just illustrate this to people. But there's, one of them is that there's more bloodshed involved in this injustice in one day than all of the wars throughout human history combined.
Okay. So why do you sway away from statistics? I mean, numbers do scare people, right?
Because people don't because I don't like to be too much in the head about this. I want people to feel this in the chest, in the gut. I feel like that's what leaves a lasting impression that has people thinking about it for a long time thereafter.
Okay. Let's go back to that hypocrisy / animal abuser punchline. How can we make it clear to people that although we are not the ones inside slaughterhouses slashing throats, we are indirectly contributing to the murder? How can we make them acknowledge? How can we hold them accountable to come to the conclusion that that is in fact true? That although they're not the ones slashing throats, they are indirectly contributing this.
Well, it's actually direct. I mean, I go back and I've been going back and forth on whether it's indirect and direct. And recently I had this interaction with this Austrian guy where he said, oh, I don't know if it's direct. And I retracted my statement. I said, okay, well, I'm happy to go with indirect because you're still supporting it. But it's actually direct. Joey actually had a really good line for this. He said, well, what if I paid my friend to stab you? He doesn't even really want to be involved. Like, he's neutral. He doesn't have anything against you. But I paid him to stab you. Who would be responsible? Both of us would be, right? But I'm instigating it. So surely, like, I have a bit more responsibility behind this. Even though I'm not getting involved and I don't have any blood on my hands, literally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So that's one.
So you would scale it up to be actually something that's directly as opposed to indirectly. Okay, that's fair enough. I can definitely appreciate where you're coming from, or Joey. Yeah, I mean, if we don't fund this, it ceases to exist. Let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
If we don't put our hard-earned money, if we don't vote with our dollar or our whatever currency, it stops to be true. It stops to exist. And so I can, okay, that's fair enough. I can see why you would think it's now a direct correlation.
Yeah, like if you paid a hitman to kill someone,
I was just going to say
directly causing
hitman.
it.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Great minds think alike. Touching base on what we discussed earlier about the isms, specifically vegetarianism. Well, actually, no, I won't ask you that. It's already we touched on. I like to take this opportunity to perhaps change the focus to a local level. All right, let's switch things up a bit. I'm currently in Puerto Rico, as I told you before, and our chapter of AV is not something you would call big. Admittedly, I've been known to get to a cube. We try to have one at least once a month. I think every Tuesday or every month or so on and so forth. And I'll get to one, and I'll be one of 3 people that afternoon that actually shows up, Paul. I mostly do outreach in mine because most of our members are not well suited or perhaps prepared to have the tough conversations. So my question to you as the founder, of course, how can our recruiting efforts become better, and what can organizers do to help their cause?
Well, we're going to be putting more. We're currently rolling out more training for organizers. That's what we're working on right now.
Okay.
And we're going to be doing a bunch of webinars. Like as you've seen, I've done like a bunch of live streams recently around the workshop. So now I'm going to be doing that soon for our organizers as well. Yeah, and it's just about sort of rolling out the culture of what we're doing in AV as an organization and bringing that to your chapter. So like getting your volunteers, for example, to watch the workshop that I've recently done.
Okay. And
that's just a starting point. And then you could host a watch party in your volunteer group. Do you know how to do that?
I guess fair answer. I guess my answer would be no. I'm technically not the organizer for the chapter. I just learned of our chapter maybe 6 months ago, I want to say. So I've been doing street outreach for a little over 6 months. So no, I talk to me about a watch party. How do I put
well,
that?
That's one thing you can suggest to the organizers, to watch that workshop in the volunteer group on Facebook, and you can launch a watch party, which is where everybody watches it together, and then you can answer questions over on Zoom. So you can do like a small webinar.
I do have a Zoom account, yeah. Okay. I've seen you on it quite a bit of times. Okay.
Yeah, it's effective.
Okay. I'll put that, I'll make a note of that. And lastly, Paul, and with this one, I guess we can go ahead and close out. In this corona virus, this is like the mother of the questions tonight. In this coronavirus world in which you and I live, to me it's paramount that we put a finger on what actually placed the entire world in the position we currently are. How can we as activists turn something so morbidly negative into something so immensely positive?
I don't know, because I mean, I would say AV, it's positive that we've provided a platform for people around the world to get out into the streets and do activism, to put the frustration we have into something that pays off, that gives us fulfillment. And I don't know, that question is hard for me to answer, because when we do finally end this injustice, I'm not sure if that's necessarily a positive. It's just neutral. We're going back to a neutral position of not enslaving, torturing, and murdering. So it's about what we do after that point that could be positive. Like, now, what are we going to do? I'm not sure it's necessarily positive. Yeah. What we're doing to the animals is negative. Eliminating that, eradicating that from the world will then return things back to a neutral position. It won't necessarily be positive by default.
Right. Okay. Now,
So,
all right.
yeah.
It's a tough question. Yeah. Like my train of thought into asking this question is that I, as activists, I think that we would be hard pressed not to double down, maybe even triple down on our content creation right now, and use this coronavirus as a zoonotic disease to have it be the focal point of our content creation moving forward, because non-vegans need to know that we wouldn't be in this position had it not been for any sort of animal interaction, whether it's consumption, exploitation, trafficking, so on.
Yeah.
You know what? That's the reason why I wanted to ask you and sort of gauge your point of view. Yeah.
I see what you're asking now. Yeah, I guess that's a positive, using this opportunity to speak about the cause and effect of why we're in this mess.
Right.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word, I feel as though we need to exploit this negativity in order to eventually get something out of it, turn it into a positive, and see the silver lining behind all of this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's an accountability opportunity.